At Thanksgiving, while my family was toasting my brother for buying a house my mom paid for, she looked at me and said, "When will you finally settle down, Rachel?" I took a sip of water, set the glass down, and smiled. "I already did," I said. "I just didn't invite anyone who doubted me to see it. They didn't know I had paid cash for a house twice the size of his. They didn't know I was a CTO with 7 figures in the bank. They didn't know I was done being the family's shadow." And that night, as my brother's face went pale, my mom's fork dropped, and the room went silent. I realized revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting free. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon rolls filled the air as I stepped into Luke's new house in Nashville. The place looked exactly like the photos he had texted to the family group chat for weeks, with its polished wood floors and generic gray walls. A fake fireplace flickered in the corner, and a huge "Bless This Home" sign hung above it, making it feel like every other starter home in the neighborhood. Vanessa rushed over, her perfume too sweet, as she pulled me into a quick hug. "Rachel, I'm so glad you made it," she chirped, her eyes darting around to check on the pies she had left cooling on the counter. "Happy to be here," I said, forcing a small smile, handing her a small box of local tea I picked up from a vendor downtown. She glanced at it for half a second before dropping it next to a stack of plastic utensils. Luke's voice echoed from the kitchen, loud and confident, as he explained the mortgage terms to Uncle Greg, using words like equity and smart investment like he had invented them himself. Mom was standing next to him, beaming, nodding, touching his arm lightly as he talked about the extra bedroom they were planning to turn into a nursery someday. I stood near the edge of the living room, holding a cup of cider, watching the scene play out. I could see Luke's reflection in the window, the same smug grin he wore when we were kids, and he got the last piece of pie because Luke's a growing boy. "Rachel, you don't need it." That grin that told me he believed he was better, that he didn't even need to try to be the favorite. Mom caught my eye from across the room, giving me that small, tight-lipped smile she always did when she didn't know what to say to me. It lasted only a moment before she turned back to Luke, laughing at something he said about a neighbor's dog digging up their yard. No one here knew that Mom had given Luke $20,000 for his down payment. They didn't know she had taken it from the small retirement savings she kept in a credit union account she thought I didn't know about. No one here knew that when I was 20, I had called her in tears, terrified I wouldn't be able to pay for my next semester, and she had sighed and said, "Rachel, you need to learn how to take care of yourself." Vanessa called everyone to the table, clapping her hands as if she was running a show. The dining table was too big for the space, but she seemed proud, showing off the gold-rimmed plates she found on sale and the matching napkins she folded into little triangles. I sat down near the end next to Aunt Karen, who immediately started asking about my love life while slicing into the turkey. Across from me, my cousin Brian scrolled on his phone, only looking up when the food was passed his way. Luke sat at the head of the table with Vanessa beside him, Mom on his right, her hand resting on his forearm, her eyes filled with pride every time he opened his mouth to speak. The conversation moved around me like a current. I had learned not to fight against words about mortgage rates, future plans for a backyard patio, top-rated schools in the district for when the babies come. I cut my turkey into small bites, chewing slowly, letting the noise wash over me. No one asked about my job, about where I lived, about what I was working on, or if I was happy. I wasn't surprised. I had learned to expect nothing and save myself the disappointment. Mom's gaze flicked over to me, and for a moment I thought she might ask. She might finally wonder how her daughter was doing, living alone in Austin, working 80-hour weeks, building a life from nothing, managing teams of engineers older than me, signing contracts worth more than this entire house. But she didn't. She smiled, her voice light, playful, as if she was making a joke in front of the family. "Rachel," she said, tilting her head, "your brother just bought a beautiful house. When will you finally settle down?" The words fell into the room like a stone dropped in water, ripples spreading as the table fell silent. Even Brian stopped scrolling, looking up at me, waiting for my answer. Aunt Karen paused, mid-bite, her fork hovering over her plate. Vanessa looked down, pretending to adjust her napkin. Luke leaned back in his chair, smirking, that same look I had seen since we were kids, the one that told me he was waiting for me to shrink, to laugh it off, to keep the peace like I always did. I stared at Mom, letting the silence stretch, feeling every pair of eyes on me, waiting. I could see the expectation on her face, the certainty that I would deflect, make a joke, let Luke take the spotlight again. But I didn't feel like keeping the peace anymore. Not today. I set my glass down, the sound sharp in the silence that had swallowed the table. Mom's smile wavered just slightly before she adjusted it back into place. Her eyes flickered toward Luke like she was waiting for him to jump in to save the moment, to pull the spotlight back to where it belonged. I didn't look away. Actually, I said, keeping my voice calm, I've been settled for a while now. The words seemed to echo, and Vanessa shifted in her seat, glancing at Luke, who raised an eyebrow, the smirk still playing on his lips. Aunt Karen cleared her throat, stabbing her fork into a piece of stuffing like it had personally offended her. Mom blinked. Oh, she said, her voice light, airy, but her fingers tapped against her wine glass. Well, that's wonderful, dear. You never mentioned anything about I didn't think it mattered, I cut in, keeping my eyes on her. Since no one ever asks. Luke let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head like he was embarrassed for me. Come on, Rach, he said, leaning back in his chair. Don't be dramatic. We all care about you. I turned to look at him, taking in the way he lounged so comfortably at the head of the table in the house he didn't even pay for on his own, in the life that had been handed to him piece by piece, while I scraped for every inch of mine. Really? I asked, tilting my head. When's the last time you asked me about my life, Luke? He opened his mouth, closed. It glanced at Mom. Mom jumped in, her smile tight. Rachel, we're just trying to include you, sweetheart. You're always so busy with work, we never know what's going on. You never ask, I repeated, softer this time, but it cut sharper. Brian's phone buzzed under the table, but even he didn't look away. I'm settled, I said, letting the words hang in the air. I bought a house. I moved in months ago. Vanessa's eyes widened and she glanced at Luke, who sat up straighter, the smirk gone now. Mom blinked again, her mouth opening, closing. You bought a house, she repeated. Yes, I said, leaning back in my chair, letting the moment stretch. I bought a house. I've built a life. I've been settled for a while. Luke scoffed, folding his arms across his chest. Where's some tiny apartment downtown doesn't count, Rachel. I felt my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm, to let the weight of the moment sink in. It's not an apartment, I said. It's a house. A real house. Bigger than this one, actually. The words dropped like stones. Aunt Karen's fork paused again, halfway to her mouth. Vanessa's hand flew to her necklace. Mom's face drained of color, the wineglass shaking slightly in her hand. Luke's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I could feel my heart pounding, but I kept my face neutral, steady, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing how much this moment cost me to say out loud. Mom finally found her voice, her eyes darting around the table before landing back on me. But, sweetheart, why wouldn't you tell us? She asked, her voice shaking just a little. Because I said, leaning forward, resting my arms on the table. I didn't feel the need to invite people who doubt me to see it. Silence. Vanessa's fork clattered against her plate, the only sound in the room. Brian's phone buzzed again, but he didn't pick it up. Aunt Karen looked like she wanted to disappear. Luke's face was red now, a vein in his neck pulsing as he tried to form a response. Mom swallowed, looking down at her plate, her shoulders stiff. The moment stretched the tension in the air so heavy it felt like the walls were closing in. I glanced around the table, taking in the faces of people who had never seen me, not really. People who never thought to ask, who never thought I was worth asking about. Luke's hand slammed down on the table, making the dishes rattle. You think you're better than us, Rachel, he snapped, his voice loud, sharp. I looked at him, holding his gaze. My voice was calm, steady, cold. No, I said. I know I'm better than what you all think I am. Mom's eyes lifted to mine, glassy now, her lips parting like she wanted to say something to stop this before it went any further. But I didn't let her. Not today. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor. My hands were steady as I picked up my glass of water, taking a small sip, letting the silence stretch again. I'm settled, I said, quietly, looking directly at Mom. I'm more than settled. The front door creaked as a gust of cold November air swept into the house from the foyer, rattling the welcome friends sign hanging by the entrance. I looked at the faces around me, at Luke's clenched jaw, at Vanessa's wide eyes, at Mom's trembling hands, and I let the moment burn into their memory. I was 5, the first time I understood what it meant to be invisible. It was a Saturday morning in our small house in Louisville, Kentucky. Mom was in the kitchen packing snacks into a cooler while Luke stood by the door in his little basketball jersey bouncing a ball against the floor. He was tall, skinny arms and wide smiles, and he looked up at her like she was the sun. Mom leaned down, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she whispered, smoothing back his hair. I stood by the hallway clutching the corner of my pink sweater, waiting for her to look at me, to see me, to tell me she was proud of me too. She never looked. They left for his game, and I spent that afternoon alone on the porch watching the sky turn orange as the day slipped away. Years passed, but nothing changed. Luke was always the hero, the star, the boy who could do no wrong. Every scraped knee was a battle scar. Every C on a test was because he tried his best. Mom framed his participation ribbons, hung them on the fridge with magnets shaped like apples and hearts. Meanwhile, I learned to keep my report cards to myself, slipping them into my backpack, the A's and perfect scores tucked away because they didn't matter. "Girls need to learn to take care of themselves," she would say when I asked for new shoes or for her to come to my ballet recital. I remember standing backstage in a small community center wearing a blue leotard and a cheap plastic tiara, peeking out into the audience, hoping to see her face. All I saw was an empty seat in the middle row. She was at Luke's basketball game that afternoon, cheering him on, screaming his name. She forgot my birthday once. I was 12, waiting for her to come home from Luke's high school orientation. She walked through the door carrying a folder of pamphlets about college prep and scholarships for athletes, her face bright with excitement as she told me about the schools Luke might go to. She paused when she saw the cake I had tried to bake, lopsided and half-burnt, sitting on the counter with 12 candles stuck into the frosting. She blinked, opened her mouth, closed it again. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry," she said, but her eyes were already moving back to Luke, who was scrolling on his phone, smirking. I told her it was okay, but it wasn't. By the time I was 17, I had learned to fade into the background. Family dinners were Luke's stage, every conversation circling back to his games, his grades, his future. I would help Aunt Pam in the kitchen, slicing fruit, washing dishes, listening to them laugh about Luke's stories. "Rachel, can you bring out the drinks?" Aunt Pam would say, handing me a tray of sodas and beers. "Sure," I'd reply, forcing a smile, stepping into the dining room where Luke was holding court, his hands waving as he told some story about the game-winning shot he made, everyone laughing, clapping him on the back. Mom would look at him like he was the brightest light in the room, her eyes soft, her smile wide. I would place the drinks on the table, step back, and disappear again. When I graduated high school, I got a scholarship for IT at the University of Louisville. I thought maybe that would change things, that she would look at me the way she looked at him. But she didn't. I worked nights at a diner to pay for books and rent, wiping down tables until my hands were raw, studying during my breaks with coffee that tasted burnt and cold. I called her once asking if she could help with a month's rent when I was short, my voice shaking with the shame I felt just for asking. She sighed on the phone, told me I needed to learn how to manage on my own, that Luke needed help with his off-campus housing and his car repairs. I hung up, sitting on the steps outside the diner, letting the cold air bite at my skin, reminding myself not to cry. That was the night I promised myself I would never ask again. I started working double shifts after that night, pouring coffee for truck drivers at midnight, wiping down counters, studying code on my breaks. My grades stayed high because they had to. I knew no one was coming to save me. Mom would call sometimes, her voice bright as she told me how Luke was doing. "He's working so hard," she'd say, "trying to get that promotion at the shop." I'd hold the phone against my ear, letting her words fill the silence of my tiny apartment, wishing she would ask me about my classes, my job, my life. She never did. When Luke needed a car to get to work, she co-signed the loan without hesitation. When he wanted to move into a nicer apartment, she helped with the deposit. She sent him grocery money when he complained about rent. She told me it was different, that boys need a little help sometimes. I learned to stop asking, to nod and say, "That's great, Mom," while I packed leftovers into plastic containers to get through another week. Family dinners were the worst. I would drive back to Louisville, taking the bus if I couldn't afford gas, showing up with a pie I had baked, hoping it would be enough. Aunt Pam would greet me at the door, pulling me into the kitchen, handing me a paring knife. "Can you slice these apples, Rachel?" she'd ask. "Sure," I'd say, washing my hands, tying my hair back. I'd stand there with her, the sounds of laughter and Luke's voice drifting in from the dining room. He would be telling a story about work or a funny thing that happened at the store, and everyone would laugh, interrupting each other with praise. Mom's laugh was the loudest. Sometimes I would pause, holding the knife above the cutting board, closing my eyes, letting the ache in my chest settle before I started cutting again. Once I walked out with the fruit tray, setting it on the table in front of Luke as he launched into another story about a customer who almost slipped on a wet floor, how he saved the day by catching them. Mom clapped her hands, telling everyone how lucky they were to have him. "Luke's always been such a hero," she said, smiling at him with pride. I looked at her, hoping for a glance, a nod, something to say she saw me. She didn't look. Later that night, as I washed dishes with Aunt Pam, she glanced at me, her hands moving quickly in the soapy water. "You're doing good, Rachel," she said quietly. "Don't think no one notices." I nodded, blinking away tears I didn't want her to see. When I graduated college, I didn't tell them right away. I didn't expect a party or a cake. I just mailed the notice to Mom, letting her know I would be moving to Austin for a job I had landed. She called, her voice cautious. "That's far, Rachel," she said. "Are you sure you want to go that far away?" "It's a good job, Mom," I said. "I'll be okay." There was a pause, the sound of her breathing on the other end. "Well, I guess if you think it's best," she said before quickly adding, "Luke's thinking of moving too, you know. For a better job." Of course he was. The night before I left, we had one last dinner at the house. Luke was there talking about the truck he wanted to buy, how he was looking at apartments in a nicer part of town. Mom smiled at him, her hand on his arm, her eyes shining. I sat there, pushing food around my plate, the plane ticket tucked into my bag upstairs, my future waiting for me just out of reach. I understood then, clearer than ever before. If I didn't stand up, if I didn't fight for my own place in this world, I would disappear forever. They thought I would fail, just like they always expected me to, but they didn't know I would become a millionaire before 30. I arrived in Austin with 2 suitcases and $300 in my checking account. My apartment was a tiny 1-bedroom near a highway, the walls thin enough to hear the neighbors fighting, the AC rattling every time it turned on. I didn't care. I woke up at 5 every morning, went for a run along the cracked sidewalks, made coffee in a cheap machine that sputtered and hissed, and took the bus to work. I was the youngest developer on the team at a small startup, paid barely enough to cover rent and groceries, but they gave me something no one else ever had: stock options. I didn't know much about them at first, but I stayed late every night asking questions, learning how the company worked, why it mattered when investors came by, why the founders looked nervous when they talked about runway and valuation. When my coworkers went out for drinks, I stayed back eating rice and eggs at my desk, working on projects that weren't mine because I wanted to learn. I taught myself systems architecture, debugging tools, and even a bit of design, fixing problems no one else wanted to touch. Months turned into years. I moved up from junior developer to team lead, then to engineering manager. I stopped taking the bus and bought a used car with cash. I still packed my lunches, still brewed cheap coffee in the break room, still wore the same 3 cardigans until they thinned at the elbows. I saved every bonus, every extra dollar. I invested carefully, watching the markets late at night on my cracked phone, reading forums, taking notes. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't buy new furniture. I didn't take vacations. While Luke was showing off his new truck on Facebook, I was learning how to negotiate equity grants during my promotion to VP of engineering. When Mom called to tell me Luke was moving into a bigger apartment, I was finalizing a deal to become the company's CTO. The day the company got acquired, I was 28. I was in the office when the founders called me and handing me a folder with the details. I remember sitting there looking at the numbers, feeling my hands shake as I realized what it meant. My equity would pay out over $1.2 million. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone, not even Lily, not yet. I walked out of the office, sat in my car, and let the engine run while I stared out at the Texas sky, the sun dipping low and turning the clouds pink and gold. I had done it. I had built something no one could take from me. That weekend, I told Lily, the only person who ever really saw me. We sat on the floor of my apartment eating takeout. I finally let myself order the containers spread around us. "Holy crap, Rachel," she said, her eyes wide. "You're rich." "I guess I am," I said, laughing for the first time in what felt like years. She reached over, grabbing my hand. "I'm so proud of you." It was the first time I heard those words from someone I believed. We spent the night planning. I didn't want to waste the money or let it change me. But there was one thing I wanted, something I had kept saved on my phone for months. A house. Not just any house, but one I had seen while driving outside the city, tucked near a creek, surrounded by tall trees, with a wraparound porch and enough space for me to finally breathe. The asking price was high, but I had the money. I paid in cash, signing the papers with Lily by my side, the realtor smiling too wide as he handed me the keys. I moved in quietly, no family to help, no calls from mom asking if I needed boxes or a truck. Lily helped me carry in the essentials: a mattress, a coffee maker, a laptop. We sat on the porch that night, drinking cheap wine, listening to the crickets, letting the breeze wash over us. I didn't tell mom. She called me the next week, talking about how Luke had just bought a new car, how he was looking at engagement rings for Vanessa. "That's nice, Mom," I said, standing in my kitchen, the windows open, the sound of the creek outside. "You're still renting, right?" she asked, her voice light. "Yeah," I said, looking around at the home that was mine and mine alone. "Luke says it's time for you to think about settling down," she said, laughing like it was a harmless joke. I smiled, letting her words drift away, looking out at the trees swaying in the Texas wind. After the call ended, I set my phone down on the counter, the silence of the house wrapping around me. It was a warm silence, the kind that made me feel safe, the kind I had built for myself. That weekend, Lily came over with a basket of pastries and 2 coffees. She walked in like she always did, dropping her bag by the door, slipping off her shoes. "Your place still feels like a dream," she said, spinning slowly in the kitchen, taking in the open beams, the large windows, the way the light spilled across the wooden floors. "It's real," I said, leaning against the counter, watching her take it all in. She stopped, looking at me. "Does she know?" I shook my head. "She thinks I'm still renting." Lily raised an eyebrow, setting her coffee down. "And you're okay with that?" "I don't need her to know," I said, but my voice was softer than I meant it to be. She didn't push it. Instead, she pulled me outside, and we sat on the porch, our feet propped on the railing, the breeze brushing past us as we sipped our coffees. "Remember when you were working those double shifts?" she asked, glancing over at me. "Yeah," I said, letting out a small laugh. "I remember falling asleep on the bus, waking up just in time to get off at the diner." "You've come so far," she said, her voice warm, steady. I nodded, looking out at the creek that ran behind the house, the water catching the sunlight. It wasn't about the money, it wasn't about the house. It was about proving to myself that I could do it, that I could build something without anyone's help, without waiting for permission. Later that evening, I made dinner, something simple: pasta with garlic and olive oil, with a salad Lily threw together. We ate on the porch, the sounds of crickets starting to rise around us as the sun dipped lower. "You know," Lily said between bites, "one day she's going to find out." I looked at her, the fork pausing in my hand. "And when she does," Lily continued, "she's going to realize she was looking at the wrong child this whole time." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. After Lily left, I walked through the house, turning off lights, checking the doors. I paused by the large window in the living room, looking out at the yard, the trees swaying gently in the night breeze. My phone buzzed on the table, a text from Mom. "Luke just bought new rims for his truck." "Looks so sharp." I stared at the message, the words sitting heavy in the quiet of the room. For a moment the old ache returned, the need for her to see me, to notice me, to be proud. I set the phone down, taking a deep breath. I walked into my office, the shelves lined with books and small plants. I managed not to kill the desk clean, organized the computer humming softly. I sat down, opening my laptop, pulling up the files for a new project I was working on. I lost myself in the lines of code, in the quiet satisfaction of building something piece by piece, the way I had built this life. Hours passed, the night stretching around me, the house quiet except for the sound of the creek outside and the soft tapping of the keys under my fingers. I leaned back in my chair, looking around at the space I had created, the space that was mine. They thought I would fail. They thought I would always be the one left behind. But they didn't know I had already won. And one day Mom would realize who was truly settled in this family. I didn't expect to see him standing in the lobby of my office building. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched under a faded denim jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over thinning gray hair. He held a worn duffel bag in one hand, shifting it from side to side as he glanced around, trying to look like he belonged there. "Rachel," he said when he saw me, his voice softer than I remembered, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to say my name. I stopped, the badge around my neck swinging forward, the lobby suddenly feeling too quiet, too bright. "Roy," I said, keeping my voice even. He blinked, letting out a breath, trying to smile. "I was hoping we could talk." I didn't move. People walked around us, some glancing, some ignoring the scene, their heels clicking against the polished floors. "What do you want?" I asked. His eyes darted away, then back to me. I wanted to see you." I tilted my head, studying him, the lines on his face, the way his hands trembled slightly. I remembered those hands slamming doors, gripping beer bottles, shoving boxes into the back of a rusted truck the night he left. "I'm working," I said, stepping around him. "Please," he said, reaching out, his hand hovering in the air before dropping back to his side. "I just need a few minutes." I paused, closing my eyes for a moment, then turned and walked toward the coffee shop across the street. I didn't wait to see if he would follow. I knew he would. We sat at a small table by the window, the hum of conversation around us, the hiss of the espresso machine in the background. He looked out of place, out of time, his eyes darting around, avoiding mine. "I heard you were in Austin," he said, trying to smile again. "I thought I'd come see you." "How did you find me?" I asked. He shrugged, looking down at his hands. "Your mom." "Of course." He started talking, then words tumbling out, stories of how hard it had been. How he had tried to get his life together, how he had a job but lost it, how he was staying in a shelter in Dallas, how he wanted to fix things to be a father again. I let him talk, the words washing over me, feeling both familiar and distant. "I need a chance, Rachel," he said, finally, his eyes meeting mine, watery and desperate. "Just a chance to be your dad." I sat back, crossing my arms, letting the silence stretch. "You want money," I said. His face tightened, a flash of anger before he caught it, replacing it with that same pitiful look. "I need help," he said quietly. "I need a surgery. I can't pay for it." I almost laughed. It was so predictable, so pathetic, the way he tried to frame it as a chance for me to be the bigger person, to save him, to fix what he broke. "No," I said. He flinched like I had slapped him, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. "I'm your father," he said, the anger slipping through now. "You were," I said, standing up, picking up my bag. "But you don't get to come back now, not like this." He reached out again, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "Don't contact me again," I said, turning and walking out of the coffee shop, the bell above the door jingling softly. Outside, the sun was bright, the heat pressing against my skin, the city moving around me as I stood there, letting the air fill my lungs. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Mom. "Rachel," she said as soon as I answered, her voice sharp, angry. "Your father called me. He said you refused to help him." "He's not my responsibility," I said. "He's your father," she snapped. "You're so cold, Rachel." I closed my eyes, feeling the old hurt rise up, then pushed it down. "Goodbye, Mom," I said, hanging up before she could say anything else. Another message came in, this time from Luke. "You're heartless," he wrote. "He's sick and you can't even help." I stared at the message, letting the anger settle into something cold, something clear. I put the phone away, taking a deep breath, the wind brushing against my face. No one was going to make me feel small again. I walked back into my office, the air conditioning cold against my skin, the hum of conversations blending into a dull background. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, the cursor blinking on an unfinished report. My reflection in the dark monitor showed a calm face, but I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the memory of his eyes begging me in that coffee shop. I opened my email, clearing out the junk, ignoring a message from HR about the upcoming meeting, ignoring a discount email for the store I never shopped at. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom. "Rachel, you don't understand what it's like to be alone at this age. He needs help." I turned the phone over, letting it buzz against the wood, refusing to read the rest. The guilt they wanted me to feel was knocking at the edges, reminding me of the little girl in the pink sweater, waiting at the window for him to come back, promising herself it would be different next time. But it wasn't different. There was a knock at my door. Lily peeked in, her eyebrows pulling together when she saw my face. "You okay?" she asked, stepping and closing the door softly behind her. "Yeah," I said, but my voice was rough. She sat down across from me, folding her hands, waiting. "My father showed up," I said finally. Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. "He wants money. Says he's sick, needs surgery, wants to be my dad again." I let out a bitter laugh. "He found Mom, told her I wouldn't help. Luke's calling me heartless." Lily leaned back, shaking her head. "They don't get to do this to you." I looked at her, at the steady way she held my gaze, the way she didn't flinch from my anger. "He left us," I said, my voice low. "He left Mom with nothing, left us with nothing. I used to watch her cry at night thinking we didn't hear. He doesn't get to come back now, not after everything." Lily nodded. "You don't owe him anything." I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "They think I'm cruel," I said. "No," Lily said firmly. "You're protecting yourself." I closed my eyes, letting her words settle, letting them become true. That evening, I drove home with the windows down, the warm air of Texas brushing against my face, the sky streaked with orange and purple as the sun set behind me. I pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires, the lights of my house glowing softly against the darkening sky. I walked inside, setting my bag down, letting the quiet of the house wrap around me, reminding me that this was mine, that I built this, that no one could take it away. My phone was still buzzing, more messages from Mom, a missed call from Luke, the notifications lining up like soldiers demanding my attention. I picked it up, scrolling through the words, the guilt, the anger, the manipulation hidden in concern. "You're so cold. You don't understand what family means. He's your father." I set the phone down on the counter, the screen lighting up with another call from Mom, the vibration loud in the quiet house. I let it ring. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, the creek moving softly in the distance. I stood there breathing, letting the sound fill me, grounding me in the life I had chosen. They wanted me to feel small, to bend, to fold myself into the shape they needed, but I wouldn't. Not now. Not ever again. I walked to the window, looking out into the dark, the moonlight catching on the water, the world calm and quiet around me. No one would make me feel powerless again. I woke up before sunrise, the sky still dark, the house quiet around me. I made coffee, the smell filling the kitchen, grounding me as I stood by the window watching the first light stretch across the trees. My phone buzzed on the counter, Lily's name lighting up the screen. I answered, hearing the strain in her voice before she spoke. "Rachel," I didn't know who else to call. "What happened?" I asked, my voice calm, steady. "It's Luke," she said, her breath catching. "He's in trouble, Rachel. Real trouble." I felt my chest tighten, my mind already preparing for the worst. "Tell me everything," I said. She took a shaky breath. "A friend in HR told me he's under investigation at his company. They think he's been stealing client data, rerouting commissions to himself without authorization." I let out a slow breath, the pieces clicking together. "How long?" "Months, maybe longer," she said. "And there's more." I waited, the silence heavy between us. "It's Emily," she continued, her voice breaking. "She works with him. He's been texting her, cornering her at work, saying things that..." Her voice dropped. "She's scared, Rachel. She's afraid if she reports him, she'll lose her job." I closed my eyes, the anger rising cold and sharp. "Does she have proof?" I asked. "Messages, screenshots." "She's terrified, but she doesn't know what to do." "Send me everything," I said. "Are you sure?" Lily's voice was small. "He's your brother." I opened my eyes, staring at the light creeping across the floor. "I'm sure." That afternoon, I met Monica at her office downtown. She greeted me with a firm handshake, her dark eyes scanning the files Lily had sent. "He's sloppy," she said, flipping through printed messages and transaction records. "This won't be difficult to trace." I sat across from her, my hands steady, my mind clear. "I want it handled quietly. I don't want Emily hurt in this." Monica nodded. "I'll protect her identity. I'll send everything to the internal investigation team. They'll handle him." I looked at her, letting the weight of it settle between us. "He's gotten away with everything his whole life." Monica leaned back, folding her hands. "Not this time." I left her office, stepping out into the warm afternoon sun, the city buzzing around me. I felt the tension in my shoulders ease, the control returning to my hands. Driving home, I turned off the music, letting the silence wrap around me, the hum of the road beneath me steady. I thought about Emily, about how many women like her stayed quiet because they were too afraid, too alone. Not this time. I pulled into my driveway as the sun was setting, the sky painted with streaks of pink and gold. I sat in the car for a moment, watching the colors fade, the world softening around me. Inside, I made tea, carrying the mug to the porch, the night air warm against my skin. I checked my phone, a new notification flashing across the screen. Luke had posted a photo on social media, his arm around Vanessa, both of them smiling in front of his truck, the caption bragging about hard work and big moves. That smile. The same smile he wore when Mom praised him, when he brushed off every mistake, every lie, every mess he created for others to clean up. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over it, the anger in my chest replaced by something colder, sharper. He didn't know the storm that was coming. He didn't know that everything he built on lies was about to collapse. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I turned off my phone, letting the house return to its quiet hum, the steady creak of wood as it settled for the night. The next morning, I brewed coffee as the sunrise spilled soft gold across the counters. I checked my email, scanning updates from Monica, her notes sharp and precise. Internal review proceeding. Evidence is clear. Action expected within 2 weeks. I set the mug down, gripping the counter, letting the words steady me. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until the facade Luke had built would crack, until the world would see him for what he really was. I went for a run, the wind cool against my face, the gravel crunching under my shoes, each breath grounding me. I thought of Emily, of the fear in her voice when Lily first told me of how she tried to disappear at work, hoping he would stop if she stayed quiet. He didn't stop. I thought of all the women like her told to stay quiet, to be understanding, while men like Luke walked away untouched. Not this time. When I got back, I found Lily sitting on my porch, a coffee in her hands, her hair pulled back, her face pale. "He's posting again," she said as I sat down beside her, taking the coffee she handed me. I looked at the screen. Luke grinning in front of a steak dinner, Vanessa beside him, her hand on his arm, the caption reading, "Nothing but up from here." I felt my jaw tighten, but I stayed quiet. Lily looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Are we doing the right thing?" I turned to her, meeting her gaze. "We're protecting Emily. We're stopping him before he hurts anyone else." She nodded, but I could see the worry lingering, the fear of family dinners, the fear of the fallout when the truth came out. That afternoon, Monica called. "They've suspended him," she said without preamble. "They didn't tell him why, just that it's under review. He'll know soon enough." I let out a breath, sitting down on the couch, staring at the sunlight pooling on the floor. "Emily?" I asked. "She's safe," Monica confirmed. "They've taken her statement off the record. HR is moving to protect her." "Thank you," I said, the words rough in my throat. "Rachel," Monica said, her voice softer, "this won't stay hidden forever. Your family will find out." "I know," I said, my voice steady. "Let them." That evening, I stood in the kitchen cooking a simple meal, the knife tapping softly against the cutting board. My phone buzzed across the counter. A message from Mom. "Luke just helped Vanessa's parents with their yard this weekend. He's such a good man." I stared at the screen, the absurdity of it making me laugh, sharp and cold in the empty kitchen. A second message came through, a photo of Luke holding a beer, smiling in front of the yard, the caption reading, "Family first. Family first." I set the phone down, the laughter dying, replaced by a calm, cold certainty. "Family first," he said, while stealing from clients, while cornering women at work, while living off lies. I finished cooking, setting the plate down, eating in silence, the sounds of the creek outside drifting through the open window. Later that night, I opened my laptop, scrolling through Luke's social media. Photo after photo of him smiling, bragging, pretending. I wondered how long those smiles would last before they turned to panic. Before the calls came. Before the truth exploded in the family group chat. And I knew when that day came, I wouldn't pick up the phone. The morning of Thanksgiving, I woke early, the sky still dark, the air crisp against my skin as I stepped outside. I took a deep breath, letting it settle in my chest, grounding me for what I knew was coming. Inside, I packed a small bag, slipping on a simple sweater and dark jeans, tying my hair back. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, at the calm in my eyes, at the steady rise and fall of my breath. Lily pulled up just after 8, her car idling in the driveway, her face tense as I climbed in. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. "I've been ready for a long time." The drive to Franklin was quiet, the roads lined with trees already bare the world gray and still in the morning light. Lily kept glancing at me, her hands gripping the steering wheel. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied, watching the road ahead. "I do." When we pulled up to Luke's house, balloons were tied to the mailbox, a welcome sign hanging crooked over the porch. The house was nice, generic, the kind developers built in clusters. I stepped out, feeling the cold air bite against my skin, the scent of wood smoke drifting from a nearby chimney. Inside the house was warm, filled with the scent of turkey and cinnamon, the chatter of relatives, the clink of glasses. Vanessa greeted us at the door, her smile bright, her eyes tired. "Rachel, so glad you're here," she said, hugging me awkwardly. "Thanks for having us," I replied, stepping inside, Lily close behind. In the living room, Luke was holding Cord a glass of wine in his hand, laughing as he told some story about closing a big deal at work. Mom stood beside him, beaming, her eyes bright as she watched him. "Rachel, there you are," Mom said, moving to hug me. "You look so thin, honey. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Mom," I said, pulling back. We moved to the dining room, everyone finding their seats, the table heavy with food, the plates and glasses glinting in the warm light. Luke raised his glass, smiling. "Before we eat, Vanessa and I wanted to share some news." Vanessa blushed, looking down, then back up, her eyes shining. "We're getting married." The room erupted in cheers, Mom clapping her hands, tears in her eyes. She turned to me, smiling through her tears. "Your brother is building such a beautiful life," she said, her voice warm. "He has a house, a fiancé, plans for a family. When will you settle down, Rachel?" I set my fork down, letting the words settle, feeling the weight of every eye at the table. I smiled. "I'm already settled, Mom," I said, my voice calm. "I bought a house last year. Paid in cash." The table fell silent, the only sound the tick of the clock on the wall. "I'm CTO at my company," I continued, "with a 7-figure portfolio and no debt." Luke's smile froze, his glass hovering in the air. Vanessa's mouth dropped open, her eyes darting to Luke, then back to me. Mom's face drained of color, her hand dropping to the table. "What?" Mom finally whispered. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. "You never asked, so I never told you." Luke's jaw tightened, the vein in his neck pulsing. "What are you trying to prove, Rachel?" he snapped. I turned to him, my eyes steady. "Nothing. Just stating facts." The silence was thick, the tension pulling at the edges of the room, as everyone stared, waiting, the air heavy with what was about to come. Mom cleared her throat, her hands twisting the napkin in her lap, her eyes pleading as she tried to find words to rescue the moment. "Rachel, honey," she started, her voice wavering. "You don't have to say things like this today. It's Thanksgiving." Luke scoffed, leaning back in his chair, his arm draping over the back as he smirked. "Yeah, Rachel, let's not ruin the day with your little stories." I tilted my head, studying him, letting the silence hang another moment before I spoke. "It's not a story, Luke," I said, keeping my voice low, calm. "It's the truth. You see, while you were busy playing the perfect son, the perfect fiancé, you forgot the mess you left for others to clean up." His jaw tightened, the smirk faltering for a fraction of a second before returning. "What are you even talking about?" Lily shifted in her seat beside me, her eyes on Luke, her fingers gripping her water glass so tightly, I could see the whites of her knuckles. "Emily," I said, letting her name hang in the air. Luke's face paled, his eyes flickering toward Vanessa, who was staring at him now, confusion creasing her brow. "What about Emily?" Vanessa asked, her voice shaking slightly. Luke opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "The messages, Luke," I continued. "The cornering her in the office, the threats when she didn't want to go out with you. The way you made her afraid to come to work." "Stop," Luke snapped, his voice rising. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out the folder Monica had prepared, sliding it across the table toward Vanessa. She looked at it, then at Luke, before slowly pulling it toward her with trembling hands. She flipped it open, her eyes scanning the printed screenshots, the records, the evidence. "Luke," she whispered, her voice cracking, tears welling in her eyes. He reached for the folder, but she pulled it back, clutching it to her chest. "Tell me this isn't real," she said, her voice rising, her hands shaking as she held the folder. Luke's mouth opened and closed, his face turning red, his eyes darting around the table, looking for an ally, for someone to save him. Mom stood her chair, scraping loudly against the floor, her eyes wild. "Rachel, how could you bring this here, today? Do you want to destroy this family?" I stood too calmly, letting my gaze settle on her. "No, Mom. I want you to finally see the truth." "You're lying," Luke shouted, slamming his fist onto the table, making the glasses rattle. I looked at him, seeing the fear behind the anger, the desperation behind the arrogance. "I'm not lying," I said quietly. "You've been stealing from your clients, rerouting commissions to yourself, and now your company knows. They're investigating you." Vanessa let out a choked sob, pushing back from the table, her chair tipping as she stood clutching the folder to her chest as she backed away from Luke. "Vanessa, wait," Luke said, reaching for her, but she flinched back, shaking her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You promised me we were building a future," she whispered. "You lied." Luke turned back to me, his eyes filled with rage. "You think you've won, Rachel? You think you're better than me?" I stepped back from the table, shaking my head slowly, my voice calm, steady, final. "No, Luke," I said, my eyes locked on his, unflinching as he glared at me. "I don't think I'm better. I just stopped lying to myself a long time ago." His face twisted in anger, his hand sweeping across the table, knocking over glasses and plates, the sound of breaking glass filling the room as Mom screamed, reaching to catch a falling dish. Vanessa backed into the wall, sliding down to the floor as she cried, clutching the folder, the evidence of everything Luke had tried to hide. I stood there, breathing steadily, watching as Luke's world cracked open in front of everyone, the truth spilling out across the floor like shattered glass and spilled wine. And in that chaos, in that moment of loud, broken honesty, I felt nothing but clarity. 2 days later, the calls started. Lily texted me first, her words tight, quick. They suspended him. HR called the police. I sat on the porch, the morning sun warming my face, the cold breeze carrying the last leaves across the yard. My coffee went cold in my hands as I read it again. That afternoon, I drove into town for groceries, passing Luke's house on the way. The front yard was empty, no truck in the driveway, the blinds drawn tight. A foreclosure notice was taped crookedly to the front door, fluttering in the wind. Vanessa was gone. Lily said she moved in with her sister in Nashville, taking only her clothes and her dog, leaving Luke alone in the shell of the life he bragged about. Mom called 3 times that day. I didn't answer. The 4th time I picked up, hearing her breathing heavily on the other end, her voice shaking. "Rachel," she whispered, "your brother. They're saying terrible things. You have to help him." I closed my eyes, letting the silence stretch, hearing the hurt, the fear, the denial still clinging to her words. "I can't help him, Mom," I said softly. "He's your brother," she cried. "They're going to arrest him. He's going to lose everything." "He already lost everything," I said, my voice calm even. "And that's not my fault." She sobbed into the phone, and I listened until she hung up the line, going dead in my hand. The next morning, Lily called, her voice tight. "Rachel, it's your mom. She's in the hospital." I arrived at the hospital just after noon, the halls cold, smelling of antiseptic and coffee. She was in a small room, pale against the white sheets, her hair flat against her forehead, tubes and wires humming softly. She opened her eyes when I stepped in, her hand lifting weakly toward me. "Rachel," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong." I sat beside her, taking her hand, feeling how small it felt in mine. "It's okay, Mom," I said, but it wasn't forgiveness. It was release. She cried, squeezing my hand, repeating the words over and over. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger or triumph or even pity. I felt light. Later that week, Roy called. I saw his name flash across my screen while I was sitting on the porch, the breeze cool, the sun warm on my face. I let it ring, then picked up. "Rachel," he said, his voice rough, coughing. "I need help. I'm sick. I need money." I listened, watching the wind move through the trees, letting him finish. "No," I said, and hung up. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel relief. I felt nothing at all. That Friday, I visited Emily at her small apartment carrying a box of pastries from the bakery downtown. She opened the door, her eyes red, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She hugged me before I could say anything, her shoulders shaking as she cried softly against my shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for helping me." "You didn't deserve what he did," I said, pulling back to look at her. She wiped her tears, nodding, her eyes clearing as she exhaled, a small smile breaking across her face for the first time. "You helped me get my life back," she said. I smiled, stepping back, letting her close the door, leaving her in the quiet safety of her home. I walked down the hallway of her building, the faded carpet soft under my boots, the hum of the old elevator echoing behind me. When I stepped outside, the cold November air hit my face, crisp and clean, filling my lungs as I drew a deep breath. The sun was setting, spilling gold across the parking lot, catching on the frost already forming on the windshields. I stood there for a moment, letting the cold bite at my skin, grounding me in the quiet after everything that had happened. Driving home, the roads were empty, the bare trees lining the street like shadows against the darkening sky. My phone buzzed twice in the passenger seat, but I didn't look. I just let it ring, the sound a dull vibration under the music playing low in the background. When I pulled into my driveway, the lights of my house glowed softly against the dark, the porch light welcoming me like an old friend. I turned off the engine, sitting there with the heat still humming, staring at the quiet comfort of the home I had built for myself. Inside, I took off my coat, hanging it neatly by the door, letting the warmth of the house sink into my skin. I made tea, the steam rising in soft curls, the scent of chamomile filling the air as I carried the mug to the living room. I sat by the window, looking out at the dark yard, the moonlight catching on the creek, turning the water into a silver ribbon. I let myself breathe, let myself feel the calm that I had fought for, the peace that was finally mine. My phone buzzed again, lighting up with Roy's name across the screen. I let it ring, the sound harsh in the quiet, then let it stop. A minute later, it buzzed again, a voicemail notification appearing. I picked up the phone, staring at it, my thumb hovering over the screen before I hit play. "Rachel," his voice was rough, coughing in the background. "It's your dad. I need help. I'm sick, and they say I need surgery, and I don't have anyone else." I let the message play out, hearing the wheeze in his breath, the tremble in his voice, the desperation that sounded too much like the excuses he made when he left. "I need you," he finished before the message clicked off. I deleted it, setting the phone face down on the table, letting the silence fill the room again. Later that evening, I checked my email, sorting through work updates and the usual newsletters I never read. A message from Ken sat unread, the subject line simple: "Need to talk." I clicked it open, reading his words the way he tried to sound casual, asking how I was slipping in the mention that his company had gone under, that he was looking for a new opportunity. "I always admired your drive," he wrote. "Maybe we can work together again." I sat back in my chair, the memory of his smirk, the way he told me I was too intense for my own good, the way he laughed when I told him I would be a CTO before 30. I typed 2 words in response: "No, Ken." I hit send, closing the laptop, letting out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. That night, I lay in bed, the window cracked open, the cold breeze brushing against my skin, the sound of the creek outside whispering in the dark. I thought about Emily's smile, about the tears in Mom's eyes in that hospital bed, about the silence after Roy's voicemail, about the emptiness in Ken's email. And I realized I felt light. Not happy, not sad, just light, unburdened by the weight of expectations and obligations that were never mine to carry. In the morning, I would visit the hospital one last time. But tonight, I let the cold November air fill the room, letting it cleanse every piece of me that had once believed I owed them something, letting it carry away the last traces of guilt I had held for too long. The next morning, I woke before the sun, the sky still dark, the air cold as I pulled on a sweater and stepped into the kitchen. Toby's paws clicked softly on the floor as he followed me, his tail wagging, his eyes bright in the quiet. I brewed coffee, the smell warm and comforting as steam curled into the chilled air. Toby sat by the door watching me, waiting patiently, his head tilting when I smiled at him. We stepped outside, the frost crunching under my boots, the world wrapped in the soft gray of early dawn. The creek behind the house whispered, the water clear and cold, reflecting the first hints of light breaking over the horizon. Toby ran ahead, his nose to the ground, chasing scents only he could smell, his joy simple, honest, free. I followed the path along the creek, my breath clouding in the cold, my hands tucked into my pockets. I thought about Luke, about the way his world fell apart, the court dates, the plea deal that left him with nothing but probation and a record, the foreclosure signs, the empty house. I thought about the silence that followed, the calls that stopped, the way Mom's voice changed softer, smaller, as she settled back into the old house alone. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. The wind moved through the bare branches, rustling the last of the leaves, carrying the scent of cold earth and wood smoke. Toby circled back to me, dropping a stick at my feet, his tongue lolling as he looked up, waiting. I laughed softly, picking up the stick, throwing it down the trail, watching him sprint after it, his paws kicking up frost, his bark sharp and bright in the quiet morning. Later that day, I went to the farmer's market, weaving through the small crowd, the smell of baked bread and coffee in the air, the low hum of voices comforting. I bought fresh vegetables, herbs, and a loaf of warm sourdough, the bag heavy in my arms as I walked back to the car. At home, I unpacked the groceries, Toby sitting nearby watching me with expectant eyes. I tied an apron around my waist, rolling up my sleeves, letting the afternoon light fill the kitchen as I started cooking. Chopping vegetables, the steady rhythm of the knife against the board, the sizzle as they hit the hot pan, the scent of garlic and rosemary rising with the steam. I moved easily, the windows open, the cold breeze mingling with the warmth of the stove, Toby lying on the rug, his eyes closing as he drifted into sleep. In the evening, I called Lily, her laughter filling the phone, her voice bright as she told me about her plans, about the hiking trip we promised we'd take, about how Emily was doing better, starting a new job, smiling more. I promised we'd all go hiking in the spring, the mountains, wading the trails, stretching under the clear sky, the air sharp and clean, the future wide and open. After we hung up, I stepped outside, the porch cool under my bare feet, the stars bright above scattered across the dark like pieces of light. Toby came to sit beside me, pressing his warm head against my knee, his tail thumping softly against the wood. I looked out over the yard, the creek glinting in the moonlight, the trees standing quiet, the world holding its breath in the cold November night. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Toby nudged my leg, his nose cold against my skin, pulling me back from the quiet thoughts swirling under the November sky. "Come on, buddy," I whispered, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. We stepped off the porch, the grass cold under my boots, the moonlight guiding us as we followed the small trail down to the creek. Toby trotted ahead, tail wagging, his paws crunching softly over the fallen leaves. The water moved slowly, catching the moonlight in ripples as I stood there, letting the cold air brush across my face, breathing in the scent of pine and frost. Toby sniffed along the edge, then lifted his head, looking back at me with bright, expectant eyes. I smiled, picking up a small stick, tossing it gently into the water. He splashed after it, the ripples spreading out, breaking the perfect reflection of the moon for a moment before returning to calm. As we walked back toward the house, I thought about everything that had led me here. Luke's world falling apart, the foreclosure, the silence that replaced his bragging the day he finally stopped calling. Mom living quietly now, her calls less frequent, her voice softer when she did call, no longer asking about Luke, no longer comparing, her words slower, like she was still learning how to speak to me. I kept in touch with Lily, her laughter coming through the phone, when we shared small victories, her stories about Emily's new job, how she had started smiling again, how she was learning to trust herself. I had blocked the numbers of everyone who had once drained me, choosing instead to fill my days with things that fed my spirit. I joined a local hiking group, the mountains becoming my sanctuary each climb, reminding me of how strong I had become. In the evenings, I taught myself to cook, testing new recipes, the kitchen warm with the scents of garlic, lemon, and herbs. Toby would sit on the rug, watching me, his eyes closing as he drifted into sleep, safe, loved. At work, I pushed the company forward, leading projects with confidence, mentoring younger women in tech, showing them they never had to shrink themselves for anyone. And for the first time, I didn't crave anyone's praise or validation. I didn't feel like a shadow in someone else's story. I didn't measure my worth by the love I couldn't get from people too broken to give it. I had chosen this life step by step, mistake by mistake, victory by quiet victory, until I was here in this small piece of the world that was truly mine. Thanksgiving morning, I woke early, the frost thick on the grass, the creek steaming slightly in the cold light. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, stepping onto the porch with a cup of coffee, Toby following and curling up at my feet, resting his head on my leg. I looked out across the yard, the light shifting from silver to gold as the sun rose, the air cold but clean each breath. A reminder that I was here, that I had survived, that I was free. I closed my eyes, a small smile on my lips, letting the warmth of the mug seep into my hands. What would you have done if you were me?